So check this out. One of my favorite pieces in the Bible. It's where Peter's doing what Peter does all the time. He thinks with his mouth. He's just not one of those guys that really thinks about the consequences of his actions until it's too late. So the piece that I really like, Peter and some of the other disciples, they're out on a boat and they're on the lake. And it gets dark and then the waves start picking up. So it becomes really a pretty scary moment for them. They begin to wonder, are we going to make it? Is the boat going to turn over? And just when you think things can't get any weirder, Jesus comes walking on the water. And they're seeing him walking. And you have to remember, they've been with Jesus for 3 years. They've been following him around. They've seen his miracles. They know what he does. So you would think that it would be a very comforting thing, but instead it says they screamed and they're freaking out like it's a ghost. But Peter, as Peter does, says, Lord, if that's really you, call me out of the boat. And Jesus, being the straight shooter that he is, he typically doesn't beat around the bush. So he looks at Peter and he just says, okay, come to me. Peter steps out of the boat and he's walking on the water. I mean, can you imagine what that must feel like? He's walking on the water, steps out of the comfort of the boat. And all of a sudden his brain starts to own him and he begins to think about the idea, I can't walk on the water. And so it says he begins to sink and flounder and he realizes he's going to drown and he's crying out, Lord, help me, save me. And Jesus does what Jesus does. He saves him and kind of scolds him, actually. He says, where's your faith? He gets Peter back in the boat safely. But the moment that really sticks in my mind, the one that really owns me, the one that says, wow, this is compelled. This is the absolute definition of compelled. Is when he steps out of that boat. He doesn't say, well, what's going to happen? Who's going to help me? What's going to be the consequences? Where will I go? What will I do? He doesn't think about anything. He's totally locked into Jesus and he just says, all right. And he steps out of his comfort zone onto the water. That little piece of time when he's all in, that's compelled. So then we have to ask ourselves, what's the difference between compelled and just acting on an impulse? So I'll take you with Peter again to another piece in the Bible. They're in this grove of olive trees, and Jesus is trying to tell his disciples, this is my last night with you guys, and I need you to hang out with me, stay awake. And he's praying to God, and it says that he's overcome with emotion, and he keeps telling them, stay awake with me, stay awake with me. And all of a sudden he realizes they're asleep again. So he wakes them up to tell them, hey, this is it, man. This is the final time. And Jesus knows who's coming. He knows the guards and the servants and the soldiers are going to be coming to collect him, to arrest him. He knows it's going to happen tonight. So as they show up, the disciples are a little freaked out. And they stand up and everybody's face to face. And there's this moment where you have all these armed guards and soldiers staring at Jesus and his disciples. And Peter gets all crazy, pulls out his sword, and he lops this dude's ear right off. Just lops his ear off. And I have to laugh and think, Jesus has to look at this moment kind of like a dad when their kids misbehave. And he's going to pick this ear up and he's going to look over at Peter and kind of roll his eyes. And it says that he healed the man. He put the ear back or he healed it. I don't know how he actually did it. But he looks over at Peter and says, hey, put your sword away. If we're going to live by the sword, we're going to die by the sword. And it's his way of saying, that's not what we're here for. I mean, come on, if we're compelled by God, we're called to do something amazing with our life, a whole lot more than just taking a sword and cutting somebody's ear off. But Peter was working off of impulse. He wasn't compelled at that moment. He is thinking all the details himself. God didn't say, hey, I want you to cut that ear off. Peter just acts on his own and it failed miserably. And there's been many people done many things in ministry where they said, oh, I'm going to do this and God's going to bless this, and it falls flat on its face. It turns into something way less than what they ever imagined. And the reason being, they weren't called by God to do it. They were calling themselves. So when you're compelled to do something, you'll know because God will be in the middle of it. God will be there to bless it, to make it what he wants it to be.